Welcome back to the Adrenal Fatigue Podcast. This is Angela, and I'm here with my co-pilot Danielle Zies and a very special guest. I've been looking forward to this conversation, and I think many of you out there will take away some pretty powerful tools today for your recovery. Many of you know the emotion of fear all too well, right? Especially when it comes to your physical health. Fear happens in the mind, but it creates a physical response in the body. It elicits the stress response of fight or flight or flee, and it impacts our nervous system. So it's tricky because when you have health issues, you can go into fear very easily, particularly when you have adrenal and hormonal imbalance, right? Because this creates a cascade of health issues that can sometimes be scary because they have symptoms like frequent dizziness, heart palpitations, shortness of breath. Those are just a few. There are lots of unknowns, really, unless you have a practitioner that's well-versed in this area and can tie all the connections of your symptoms together and get to the root. So all this and the scary symptoms create more stress, right? So it's often a double-edged sword. That's why we wanted to have this conversation today about fear, to bring light to it and talk about simple strategies to stop the cycle of fear, stress, and suffering. We have a very special guest today, like I mentioned, who knows personally all too well about fear around physical health. Jennifer is an intuitive mixed media artist, soul guide, and light worker on a mission to inspire others and spread light. Shortly after a cancer diagnosis at the age of 31, as a new mom, she co-founded the Moonstone Collective, an inspiring community of women on their healing and personal growth journeys. She is a forever student and is deeply connected to her spirituality, and she now lives her life passionately, on purpose, and shares her knowledge with others through coaching, speaking engagements, and wellness events, retreats, and programs. We're so excited to have her today. So welcome, Jen. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Cool. So I think a great place to start out with this conversation is for you to just share your story with us. Sound good?
Yeah, amazing. So yeah, I guess I should just go back to how this all started. 2019 was a really traumatic year for me. I know everyone thinks 2020 is the year of trauma, and it was, but for me, it started kind of a year prior. In February of that year, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And I was a new mom at the time. My daughter was about 9 months old, and I was breastfeeding and, found a lump. Didn't think it was anything at first, although, when looking back, we know that intuition, especially as women, that we kind of did know, when we kind of doubt it. And, I tried to tell myself things like it's just a clogged milk duct and all the things that the doctors are telling you. Oh, don't worry about it, sweetheart, you're young, but fast forward through tests and whatnot, it turned out to be the worst thing that I feared, which was breast cancer. And my mom had had breast cancer 12 years prior, so I had seen her already go through the motions of treatment and all of that. And having already witnessed that, now being like, okay, I know what I'm going to expect, it was pretty terrifying. Especially, being a young mom and a, fairly newlywed, starting our life. This was the last thing that we anticipated. So going through this experience, I ended up having a surgery, a double mastectomy, and I opted out of traditional allopathic treatments. So I ended up going the natural route, and it really did catapult my holistic healing journey. I started to deep dive into the world of wellness in all areas. So it started with the physical things, changing my diet, seeing an herbalist. I was already, quote unquote healthy. I'd never, ate fast food or anything like that. But when I made those changes, I did see a big shift, but I still knew that there was other things, beneath the surface that I had to address. So yes, changing my diet was great, exercise, yoga, all of that, swapping out all my products for non-toxic on all of those things. But I knew I had to address, the stress, the emotional health, the mental health. and the energetic, way that my body was reacting to things. So yeah, I kind of just dove in head first. I became, obsessed with healing and any modality I could get my hands on, which I'll touch on later. But I guess, looking back on it now, that's actually a fear-based reaction, right? So I was doing all these things obsessively out of fear. And there's a difference to now how I handle, I'm still so passionate about all the modalities of wellness, but I come at it at a very different angle now. More curiosity and excitement than fear. So yeah, so at the same time that I was going through all of this, my best friend was going through a divorce at the same time. And we kind of, going through two traumas at the same time, very young, we kind of just leaned on each other for support, not knowing what to do. And even though we were going through very different, circumstances on the outside, we realized that, the emotional healing and the mental healing, there's so many similarities and so many tools that we could both use and help each other with. And we started going to events and finding communities of women and almost like a supportive community within full moon circles and that type of thing. And we were hooked as soon as we found the amazing power that there is when groups of women especially come together and share how they're feeling and being vulnerable and courageously vulnerable with each other. It's incredible, the transformation that happens. So in doing that and being hooked on this, community vibe of circles and all of that, we both came from an event background, and we decided, why not just do this for ourselves and create a community where we can, still go along on our own healing journeys, but then, meeting other women who are going through their own thing, because everyone's going through something, as we all know, right? We've either gone through something or we're going through it right now, or both. So yeah, we started Moonstone Collective at the end of 2019. And then in early 2020, we had our first in-person retreat. And our idea was, we're going to have these amazing events and retreats in person, and it's going to be great. We did our first one, and then COVID hit, and we were forced to kind of pivot into the online event world. And we were very resistant to it because we didn't feel like it was going to have the same vibe, the same energy. But after much resistance, we just surrendered to it. And we realized now how it's kind of a blessing in disguise, because it's brought so many women together from all across the world, which that probably wouldn't have happened right away, if we were just doing in person. And so there's been a lot of positives that has come from it as well. And yeah, and that's kind of brought us to, our own healing journey and bringing it back to our own community. And now we create, various events. We have a meditation series every Monday night that I run called Meditated Mondays. And it's just a way to allow our community this exploration of meditation, which is, again, I'll get into this a little bit more, but meditation is like my number one practice for this whole journey that I've been on. And it doesn't come in, one package. There's so many ways we can meditate. There's so many ways we can connect and go in. It's just about trying them out. And I feel like there's a lot of fear or overwhelm with the idea of meditation. And so this series is kind of a way to just, demystify all of that and show people that really anyone can meditate. It's just finding something that works for you. So yeah.
Awesome. I love that. And thank you so much for sharing your story with us, Jen.
Oh, well, thank you.
And I have had the pleasure of joining some of the Moonstone Collective retreats. And I can just say to anyone out there listening, like the energy in there and the content that you guys bring to the table is just so top notch. It's just wonderful and beautiful. And I'm so glad it exists. But I think you really hit the nail on the head when you said like fear. There's so many different types of traumas and things that will set us off in all different layers and capacities of our life that invoke that feeling and that fear response. And it could be a little thing or it could be a big thing, but it's really the way that we react to it. I mean, in the adrenal world, when we're already like revved up and our nervous systems are already in high gear, we tend to like really easily go into that fear response just because we're kind of like always stuck there. And so I think this is going to resonate, this conversation is going to just resonate so well with our community. So I'm so excited to have it today. But I think a great place to kind of cycle into following your story is just chatting a little bit more about the fear emotion, if we could.
Yeah. So the fear emotion is something that I've been looking into quite a bit since this all started. And, just figuring out like, what is fear? There's, comes in so many shapes and sizes and containers and textures. And, it could be something as simple as, just feeling a little bit of anxiety. Like if you're nervous for something, that's out of fear. If you're worried about something, that's fear. If you're feeling doubtful, that's also fear. So fear is kind of like the umbrella, I like to look at it. And there's so many different emotions within that are kind of like fear, other characters of fear. But they're all fear. They're all the same kind of thing, and they can be dealt with pretty similarly. So yeah, I mean, fear is there's two ways I like to look at it. There's the fear in terms of survival and the energy of our bodies are very, and you guys can probably speak to this way more than I can on a physiological level, but our bodies kind of kick into survival mode when we're threatened, when our lives are threatened or our bodies are physically threatened. And there's not much that we can control on that initial reaction. It's just something that it's actually a good thing that we have that built into our system because it keeps us safe. It protects us, right? The thing that we can actually control, though, is the second fear. So the second reaction, which is the fear of the fear. And that's where there's kind of a gap. And like you said, when we're already kicked into that fear, our body's kicked into that fear reactive state, it's easy to just go there and continue on the fear path. So it's hard to separate the two. But there's so many things that we can do to bring awareness to this and to kind of create a gap and create separation between our thoughts and our feelings. And that's kind of the first step in determining, what we can control and what we can't. Because again, the first reaction, we can't control that. Being told I have cancer, that's going to send me into a survival mode. And that's exactly what happened. It's like I kick in and I'm like, okay, to my doctor in the diagnosis room. Okay, so what do I do? What do I have to do? Like, what's going to be my plan? What's the action, after the initial waterworks had kind of subsided. And then it went into, the worry and the fear of the fear. And what if, all of those catastrophizing thoughts that come in, those are the things that if we don't get a handle on them, they can eat us alive. And that's where I really wanted to address, that secondary thought of fear. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
Yes.
Yeah, that was really interesting. And I am curious how you feel that you pulled yourself out of, like you went into reaction at first, but then you started to just go right into action pretty quickly after that. And I think that's where sometimes people get stuck is I always talk about action versus reaction. And so where did you find yourself being able to be pulled out of that reaction? How, what was it? Is it something that you already that's just how you have always been, or what allowed you, would you say, to move into action and move into this place that you are now?
Right. So in that initial, moment in the diagnosis room, I think it just turned into, okay, there's something happening to me and I have no control over what the words that my oncologist is telling me right now. I have zero control of what she's telling me. And I've always, I guess, maybe it is part of, my personality, but I've always had, a bit of control issues, if you want to say. So I immediately went into what can I control? If I can't control what you're telling me, like, what can I do to help my outcome? So maybe that is a little bit, built in. but it's still available to all of us. I think the biggest part that I did, and I didn't know this at the time because I wasn't, awakened and tapped in as I am now, but I started breathing. She gave me some moments alone with my husband and my daughter who were there with me, and I just did some breathing reactively. Like, I didn't even know what I was doing, but I knew I had to calm myself down. And even simple diaphragmatic breathing, where we breathe into our bellies and we really expand and slow down the pace of our breath, that immediately switches us over from, that fear-based state to, the parasympathetic nervous system, and getting that back to rest and repair. So I did do a little bit of that. So it could have been as a result of doing the breathing, but it's when she came back in that I was kind of like, okay, let's go. What do I do? What do I need to eat? What do I need to, yeah.
And what that makes me think of is almost like it's so natural to feel fear in our lives. Like, fear is actually like a natural and healthy response. And if we want to see the beauty in a feeling, like being afraid is not a good feeling, but if we want to see the beauty in it, is that it does empower you to want to make those decisions, to make changes and ask questions and figure out a solution. And so I think that it's important to remember, like, every response does have like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, every response does have its own benefit. Like, the body is wise.
Purpose. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's a reason we're having these reactions. And that's also kind of the reason I don't love the word fearlessness, because I feel like that's not a real thing. Like, I feel like we all have fear within us, and we're all always going to have some fear. We just can control how much or how little we have. And there's so many ways we can do this, again, through breathing techniques and meditation, just to name a few. But, naming the fear is another great way, and just feeling the fear, which we are taught, whether conscious of it or not, we're taught to kind of push those feelings of fear away. But what's interesting is when we actually just feel the emotion of it, we give it less power. We take its power away, essentially. We're just, we're saying, I see you, fear. I know what you're doing to me, but it's not going to fly. And I'm going to take back the reins, but it still will always be there. It's just a matter of how much you turn up or down the volume. That's how I like to look at it.
And that might be the tricky part for people, is having that moment, like taking that moment to become mindful and have the awareness.
And that's again that gap, right?
Yeah, that gap that you talk about. And then if any of you are familiar with the work of Gavin De Becker, he was actually on Oprah, but he talks about the gift of fear. And he talks about he shares some like really actually pretty scary stories, but a lot of the times the stories that he's telling is like how fear can save your life. Like when you're in a situation and you just get that vibe and you get like the hairs on your neck stand up, like that fearful feeling, but your intuition kicks in. It's just another example of that wisdom. But it's just cool. But
that's
on the other hand, when you're on the other side of the gap, and I know this from my own personal experience, and I think a lot of people in our community, Angela, you probably can relate to this too. I'm sure we all can. But when you see something that freaks you out, especially with your health, like a certain symptom pops up, a lot of our members of our community have symptoms that are a little bit scary, like tightness in their chest, or trouble breathing, or dizziness. So it's really easy to go to that place where you feel like something's really wrong. And then it's like, once you've kind of let that fear take over, you start to experience even more symptoms. So it's like it can cascade and build on itself, and even probably create new symptoms. Well, definitely create new symptoms. So
because our thoughts control our feelings, and they're very real. So if we don't control what we're thinking of or worrying about, like worry is the biggest precursor to anxiety and fear, because I actually read somewhere that 70% of the things we worry about don't actually ever happen. So to think about that, that's pretty high of a number, to be constantly worried about things that will never actually come to manifest. That's not a life that anybody wants to live. there's also, there's a chart that I love by Dr. Joe Dispenza, and he kind of polarizes the idea of survival frequencies, so fear and dis-ease and all of that, and then on the other side it's creativity and creation, so love, and more of that proactive, Angela, you were saying react versus act. I always talk about that too, because it's like being reactive versus proactive is a completely different vibration in your body. And it sends way different signals to your brain. And, again, thoughts create feelings. So if we can get a handle on being in more of that creative frequency versus survival frequency, then I think we will have a way better handle on fear and all the fear emotions.
Yeah. And it's almost, you actually mentioned it earlier, you talked about, you went from like being scared to being like excited, like what can I do? And I think that's interesting because I kind of talked to this idea that they're actually very similar, almost emotions. Energetically, they're very similar, fear and excitement.
Yes.
But the way that we look at them, right? It's the perspective that changes everything. So yeah, I just always thought that was so interesting when I learned that. And so it is about shifting the perspective on what's showing up for you, what's showing up in front of you. So anyway, there's something else I wanted to share and I lost it, so it'll come back.
And this is kind of a loaded question for the both of you, and it's a real question, and it's a real, like, this is something people are kind of going through every day when they have something scary going on with their health or they're doing testing. And a client reached out recently and he was saying that when you have been diagnosed with something, and Jen, you probably know this firsthand, like once you've been diagnosed with something and you've gone through a certain treatment and you're waiting for the results, and there's that waiting period where you're just kind of just so anxious and worried about, hoping for the best, but not sure. And you're just kind of in that waiting area.
Yeah.
This client mentioned that it's like was so debilitating, like unhealthy and having trouble functioning, but like still having to go to work and stuff and like show up. And so for somebody who's like really feeling that pressure, how can we choose something that just feels a little lighter, even when it's just feeling so overwhelming?
So that's a great question, because I, again, firsthand went through that. And sometimes in our healthcare system, we're waiting for a very long time between appointments. It's not just, an hour or a day, it's weeks and weeks. And we're left thinking all those what if thoughts and worries, right? There's a technique that I learned that was really helpful. So it goes through a series of steps. So one, you want to face the fear or the worry that comes to your mind. So again, this was all done through meditation. And I keep talking about meditation, and I will till I'm blue in the face, but it's because it's the best tool, I think, for separating ourselves from our thoughts and just realizing that we are not our thoughts, and we actually can control and have a say in what comes in and comes out. So meditation is great for that. And that's just a great practice in general for people to have. But we first want to face what we're feeling and what we're thinking. So journaling is a great way to do this too. Like, write it all out. What exactly are you afraid of? And if you want to write out, the worst case scenario, write it out and let it out of you. Don't sit there and let it bubble. Let it out. If you want to cry it out, feel it, feel the emotion. We want to accept it rather than resist or fight, because doing that actually it's like pouring gasoline on a fire, when we resist that emotion, because it's a scary one. We don't want to have to feel it, but the result is, going through it in a much more graceful way than having to resist it and fight back this huge flame. So after we've accepted it, and we've, journaling is a great tool for that as well. We want to, in a way, kind of just float. And again, this could be, building on meditation again, taking breaths. There's so many breathwork techniques out there. just coming back to your body's innate ability to turn over your reactive state to rest and repair, right? So just diaphragmatic breathing is the simplest way. You can place your hand on your belly and take a deep inhale through the nose and allow your belly to expand like a balloon, and try to really slow down your pace of breath. And then when you exhale, you can guide your stomach back in as you let all the air out. And if you do this, I mean, 3 to 5 times really is all you need, depending on how, what state you're in. If you're in a really, really traumatic state, then you might need a bit longer. But honestly, in like most cases, in 3 to 5 rounds of this breathing, you'll notice a huge difference. And when it changes you on a physical level, you're doing something good for yourself, right? To know that like in this moment, you're safe. You're, right now where you are, you're safe. It doesn't matter 5 minutes from now, 5 hours from now, 5 days, 5 weeks. In this moment, you're safe. And that's what you need to focus on. And then the last part of the step, which is pretty much the hardest part, is simply letting time pass. And, you give the body time to realize that all is well, but you're going to need to do this reminder, depending on how long you actually have to wait. You're going to have to continually do this practice. And the more you do it, the more at ease you're going to feel. There are things you can control and things you can't. You can't control, maybe when the appointment is that you're waiting for, but you can control how you're going to feel in this moment. So just, tapping in and doing that the best you can, and knowing that if you feel that fear, it's okay. Like it's a normal human reaction. We're meant to feel the full spectrum of emotion. So don't resist it. Just let yourself feel it. And journaling has been really helpful for that too.
Yeah. What we resist persists, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Absolutely. I love you mentioned a couple times about meditation and breathing, and I love that. And of course, I think it's sometimes people think that that's too simple. And that's, it's like, oh, it can't be that easy.
Just like our breath. Yeah.
Right. And, and I think that just you sharing that is profound, because you've been through such a scary, could be a very scary, fearful experience. And you talked about breathing just even in that room, which I think is a really cool thing about your story, and the power of the breath. And when we breathe, it's like you mentioned, it's about us getting into our bodies. And I find that that's where, when we are scared, we actually move out of our bodies, right? Yeah. So it's like when you come back to your breath, you're coming back to what you talked about, the present moment, being in your body. Then we're not, then we can start to learn how to feel safe in our bodies. So I love that so much. And
yeah, and it's feeling grounded, right? It's that feeling of like being grounded. So breath is just one tool.
And that's a practice. Grounding, it's a practice.
Yeah, it's a practice. It's not easy. It's not easy, but there are things we can do to like connect ourselves to our bodies and to the earth, and that helps a lot too. In the summertime, maybe not now in the snow, but putting your feet on the earth, actually that the sensation of earthing, you can Google it, you can look it up, but it's a real thing. It changes your energy. Hugging a tree, all of those things that sound kind of woo woo, but there's science behind it, that they actually calm the nervous system. And they're really helpful tools as well. Even just taking a shower, that's a great way for grounding, because you're imagining, and this is something that I've done too, to kind of make it a ritual, is you can imagine all of your fears washing off of you and just going right down that drain. And that's a really powerful kind of cleansing experience when you're going through it. And it's also a lot easier to cry in the shower, I find, too.
I love that visual.
Added bonus. Yeah.
And I will say, I legit saw somebody grounding in the snow on Instagram today. So if it calls to you, people do it.
Hey,
I'm sure it's refreshing.
I would, but all the power to you if you want to.
You can do it. And you can do it. It's always available, right? You can do it anywhere.
Yeah.
Doing it while you're doing dishes and you're feeling that panic mode of like, I need to get this done. Yeah. Ground your feet. I love it. It's so simple.
Yeah, and you can ground anywhere. You can. And I even have like a little bowl of sand that I keep in my, like I have a little meditation kind of setup. And I keep like a little bowl of sand. And if you just run it through your fingers, that's a great technique too, to just, so you don't have to go outside in the cold. You can just run your hands through the sand. It's really great too.
Yeah. One time Angela, I had you walk me through this because I was having such trouble feeling grounded when I lived in a really tall apartment building because I felt like I was just so far from the earth. But Angela, you had some great tips for just, and even that sand thing would be perfect in those scenarios if you live somewhere like a high rise and you just feel like earth is kind of far and it's hard to get all the way down there. There's other ways. It's not always just that exact connection, right? It could just be your feet on the floor.
No, just the intention, just right.
Yeah.
And I love what you talked about also, Jen, about having to go to worst case scenario. There's definitely that it's a place where not a lot of people like to go, but once you actually get to the core, like what is underneath this, because even if you make a list, I find that sometimes you have to write like 10, 12, 15 things before you actually get to the root of like what the actual fear is. And you might end up with like fear of dying. And that's a legitimate fear, and a fear that all of us not need to, but we can choose to ignore it or we can choose to face it. And I feel like can set you free at some point if you decide to learn to be with it, and that feeling that the feeling that you have when you think of that.
Totally. And that's a real feeling for sure. We're all going to die one day, and we don't know when. We can't control that. So there's no point in living day to day thinking you're going to die. It's living every day to the fullest, as cliche as that might sound. But what else are we going to do? Would you rather have a life sitting there worried, or would you rather take advantage of every moment that you can and make the most of it?
Yeah,
totally. And
thank you.
I think that these tools, Jen, that you've shared, it's more that it's like more healing than like on so many different levels, right? Because we're talking about just like calming the nervous system and getting back to ourselves. So whether it is something really scary, or if it's just day-to-day stress and you're feeling overwhelmed or anxious about COVID and like the current state of the world, like these are tools that we can kind of call to all of the time. And I think that they help heal the body they help us feel better in the moment, but they're also just so healing.
Yeah. But I like to say it's like they're tools in my spiritual toolbox that I can pull from. So I've done everything from, EFT to Reiki to somatic work to you name it. I've tried it all. As long as I've heard of it, I've tried it, trust me. And we can pull from these different modalities, but in the end, it's all about what we resonate with, what works for us and what doesn't. It doesn't necessarily work for everybody, and just being curious about different modalities and trying things out. You can pretty much find almost any video for free, for how to try out these modalities on your own. And meditation being another one for free. But the other thing I wanted to mention was the act of creativity, because I feel like it's almost, for myself, it's been kind of an antidote to fear. Because going back to the chart that Dr. Joe Dispenza created, where it's kind of this polarization between the survival and creation frequencies, when you are in this survival mode, you are in a state of fear, and when you're in a creation mode, you're in a state of love, and you have control because you're doing something. It's again going back to that moment where I was like, what can I do? That's a state of creation and creativity, because it was something that I can control. But taking an action, versus being reactive and saying, oh, I'm a victim, which is hard to accept in that moment, obviously, because I felt like a victim, and I think anybody would in that situation. But when you take a little bit of action and creativity, and it doesn't have to be, the things we think about with creativity, like painting and dancing and singing and, making music and all of that. It's anything that you are doing, that you are creating, puts you kind of in the driver's seat over fear. For me, it just happened to be art because I have an art background, and I actually lost touch with it for many years. And then this whole experience, through seeing my first ever counselor, we dove into it, and she was like, why aren't you doing this as like a therapy? This is amazing. And I dove right back into art, and I could not believe the change that happened. But obviously, like I'm a full-time mom, so I don't have time to sit there and paint and do all the artistic stuff that I would love to do all day long. So it's finding those little moments, like maybe buying a bouquet of flowers and doing an arrangement, or preparing a nice meal and like plating your food a certain way, or putting on some music and just creating a ritual. I always say my least favorite chore in the world is washing the pots and pans after dinner. So I've created a ritual out of it, which is, again, creativity is like creating ritual into your day-to-day, making those like little moments more special. So now I like turn on the music, or I'll listen to an audible book, just something that I actually can look forward to while I'm doing it. And that makes the world of difference. I know it sounds so simple, but those little changes really do help.
I love that. I always say it's not always like what you're doing that stresses you out, but how you do it.
Yeah.
So it's just a really good example of what you just shared. And I absolutely love that. And I'm a big fan also of rituals. I think it takes us out of the monotony or of some situation, and can just shift our perspective and our energy around it, making everyday things a lot more fun.
And we're actually taking, like, we're practicing mindfulness by creating ritual too, because we're not in that autopilot mode where habits are autopilot. We probably don't realize that we brush our teeth the same exact way every single time, from left to right, or whatever it may be for you. But when we create a ritual, we're bringing consciousness to that activity. And there's so many ways we can do that, but it's a great practice to have.
And I think it's really interesting you just said that, because it reminded me, it went right to that idea of sort of the ritual in the other sense, that the ones that aren't supporting us, the rituals, right, of like stress, and how the fear emotion is such a strong emotion, and how it can wreak havoc on our, the physiology, the muscles, the joints, the nerves, the organs, and causes inflammation, right? Which we know most diseases these days are the root of it is inflammation. And so, not to put like a shadow over all of this, but just a reminder that that is also the other side of the coin, right? That those are habits as well, that we, if we choose to, we can break, but it does take some practice, and
Definitely.
like the practices that you're mentioning,
Yeah, it's baby steps, but you definitely, like, by doing the work, we say, quote, quote, the work, but going like inward every single day consistently is the best thing I think anyone can do, whether you have 5 minutes or an hour. Just reflecting and seeing what's working in your life and what's not working in your life, what's working for you and what's working against you, and not feeling this overwhelm, like you have to overhaul your whole life. That's what I did in the beginning, because I was like, everything I'm doing is not working because I have cancer, so I need to throw it all out the window and start fresh. And then I was met with even more fear, and it was like a vicious cycle. So realizing, it's step by step, it's not an overnight change. But when you do look back and you have been consistent with it, you notice like a complete transformation. Even if I look back even a year ago, I'm not the same person that I was. And this journey it's never ending. I'm going to, go further and further each year, but it's just accepting the fact that it's never going to be perfect, and we're never going to be quote unquote healed, right? We're just on this healing journey, and we have to just make the most of it.
Yeah, there's so many incredible tips in here. And I really hope that you guys out there listening are taking notes, because so many in our community, they're often burnt out, very type A. Oftentimes parents used to kind of juggling all of these things and not really going inwards and doing those things that maybe we feel creative in. And I love that you touch on creativity very well. Could be like doing art or dancing, or those typical ways that we think when we think creativity, but it could be looking at your day-to-day and the things that do weigh heavy on you and do kind of take a toll, and think about how you can create new rituals, and just start small, and understanding it doesn't have to be perfect. It's just imperfect action, right? Just taking some sort of action and starting somewhere. But I love that you can just start with things that feel heavy and just start to transform them and really tap into yourself, right? So many good tips.
I just want to add one more thing. When you were talking about like all the moms or parents out there, playing with kids' toys was a game changer. Like getting in there with my daughter and like playing blocks and Play-Doh and all of that. Oh my gosh, it's incredible. It actually does a lot of inner child work and healing from a way deeper subconscious, place that we're not even aware of. So that's, if you have kids, just get in there. Just get it there. It's another great creativity.
Well, I think a lot of people would say, well, like, I don't have the energy. And I would say, well, like, that's exactly what will give you energy, right? Yeah. So I love that you brought that up. And kind of going off what both of you talked about, this creativity piece, one more thing I'd love to share about it is this idea that if you find yourself right now in a place where, you are kind of in victim mode and there's no judgment there. But if you are in victim mode, I think one of the best ways you can get out of that is to have, is there something creative? Is there something that, that you have lost touch with? Maybe it is art, like you, Jen, lost that creative juice in your life. And with that, having that to wake up to every morning, thinking about something creative to do, right? Getting you kind of out of that like victim mode, and have something to like look forward to and something to get excited about might help you shift some of that energy.
Yeah. Even if it is like part of your practice, like for me, I can't always, like I said, do art every day. So just looking forward to my morning practice, which is my sacred time in the morning that I wake up before my daughter. I have like a good almost 2 hours to myself. I worked slowly to make it that early, but just journaling, that's a form of creativity because you're writing, right? You're practicing creating something. So I love to write too. That's another form of creativity for sure. So yeah, just finding those little things.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Thank you, Jen. That's awesome.
Jen, I was going to ask if there was something that stood out as being the most significant modality during your journey. And it's kind of like, after listening to you talk, it kind of just seems like, obviously meditation was huge. And I know that can have to take so many different shapes and forms, but there's so many different things out there. And it sounds like you've tried a lot. And I do think like certain things will call to different people more, and you'll find you'll find your path as you go along it. But aside from meditation, was there anything like really big and profound for you?
There were a few things, and it did change over time as my needs changed and as I started to change. I was called to different things at different times. But meditation was the biggest thing, the biggest turning point for myself to really start to address that I'm separate from my thoughts, and that I have a lot more control over my feelings and how I manage my emotions and all of that. But what I would say was a great modality was, I mean, it's not really one modality, but any type of energy healing or energy work, whether it's Reiki or even acupuncture, those types of things, they really, really helped to keep, the body balanced and to do the work. And it's a kind of an umbrella term, but to do the work. So just showing up every day, having a consistent practice was the best thing I could ever do. I started small. I did, 5 minutes of meditation, whatever I could do. And then journaling was great. I mean, there's so many things I loved. Another great one was, these manifestation practices, which were very powerful. My favorite being future journaling. So we all do, we've probably heard of making vision boards and all of that for what we want to achieve or goals. And it could be related to your health, your relationships, whatever. And that's the visual sense, but we can do it from, a much more simple perspective. And it's a practice you can do every day. And it's called future journaling. And the way you do it is it's a journaling exercise where you pick a future event that can only happen or take place once you are, once your goal has been achieved or met. So let's say it is to heal your issue that you have, your illness. What event could that be? Celebration, a celebration or a birthday or something like that. And you bring yourself to that present moment and journal through as if you're going through the motions of that event as it's happening. So, you'd say something like, I'm here at so-and-so venue and I have all my friends and family here. I'm feeling so alive and healthy. And you're creating a sensory experience for yourself, and you're actually creating a future memory because your subconscious doesn't know the difference between what happened in the past, what's happening now, or what potentially could happen in the future. So you actually get a physiological reaction to this experience and this exercise, which I was blown away. I got emotional, I cried, but I also felt like a sense of excitement, and I was just so empowered. So this is something I do very often, like a few times a week at least. And you want to create like a sensory experience. So bringing in the senses, what do you feel? What do you smell? What do you see? What do you taste? And creating it, as real as possible. And this is something I do with all of my clients as well, because it's so powerful, and I just want everyone to experience it. So I would say future journaling if I had to choose just one, which is hard.
Yeah. That's great. This is, I think, I know it's going to be so helpful for all those listening out there. And thank you so much for sharing with us and being here. Is there anything? Oh, it's been great. Angela, do you have any questions before we wrap things up?
I think it was great. I'm really just thankful for you coming here and sharing your story as a mom, and who had a little fear of that similar thing happening, and yours came true when you had that lump and you felt that lump. I really can't imagine, and I just am so just in awe of how you were able to turn that situation around. And I'm glad that you were here to share your story with us today.
Thank you so much. And I just want to add that it's by no means like a linear journey. I have my ups and downs still to this day, and I know I will for forever. I have those moments of fear, especially around the time of the year where my MRI time comes up, and it's like, okay, it's time for my checkup. I gotta, make sure everything's okay. And the fear comes back, and it's a practice, and it continues. And there are easy moments and there are difficult moments, but that's what happens when you're human. We have to go through it all. So don't think that by feeling it, you're doing something wrong,
Yeah, and it's just nice to have tools, right?
Yeah.
That's what it's all about. And I love that you share that, because it's not that you're someone now that you no longer fear of anything, right? Like we talked about not having fearlessness, but I love how you shared that. It's like, it's not over, but now it's all about just having tools. I think that's the most important thing, so that you have a choice, right?
Yeah.
You have a choice to do it.
Yeah, and moving through the experience with a little bit more ease and grace. Having being, the more it happens, and the more, especially when the similar fears come up, the more you can recognize, like, okay, I've been here before. What did I do? How did I get out of this? And you start to, the more and more you go through it, the easier it gets to just become aware of it. It doesn't mean it's going to be easier to get through it. It just means it's going to be easier to recognize it for what it is and take away a bit of its power. So
huge.
Love that.
And also when you say it's not linear, it's just a reminder too that every day is going to be different, right? So nobody's path is going to be the same and linear to one another's. And what I wanted to mention is depending on where you are in your cycle, especially for women, as we're going through our monthly cycle, especially when we have hormonal imbalances, which is so common when we're struggling with burnout, there might be weeks of the month where we feel more fearful naturally just because of what's going on with our hormones. So we might actually be experiencing this in different ways at certain times of the month. So it's just so great to have these tools to call on more when we need them, and they're always available to us, right? Especially our breath. We have that everywhere we go.
Yeah, that's something we take for granted every single day, but it's like the simplest, easiest tool we can all access. And cyclical living, living in sync with your cycle, that was another huge I guess not a really modality, but just a philosophy, a way of living, that made a huge impact. Because when you are going through your menstruation, let's say, you can be feeling a lot more, that you just need to rest. And I think as a society, especially as women, we're taught to just like trek through and keep going. But to honor those signals that our body's giving us, that's huge, to just, when we can, at least. I know it's not always possible. I know that as a mom, it's not always possible to say, I need a nap day. Can you just go? My 3-year-old's not able to take care of herself. But, choosing when to do certain things, when to schedule certain things, the things we can control, that'll make a huge difference.
Amazing. Okay, well, with that, we'll wrap things up. Jen, thanks again so much for being here. Can you let the listeners know how to find you?
Yeah, sure. So the best way, I guess, is on Instagram. My personal handle is Jennifer De Rossi, and my company, Moonstone Collective, is Moonstone Collective Wellness. And you can, contact us there. We run a free meditation every Monday night. If you want to get a little sense of our community and what we're all about, that's probably the best way. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you again for everything. This has been a great conversation.
Thanks
and
for having me.
Until next time, I guess we'll do it again another time down the road, maybe a different topic, because this has just been really juicy.
I'd love that. There's a lot more where that came from. So
well, we're very grateful.
Thank you. I am as well. Thank you for holding space.